Forget everything the cinema told you. Forget the hovering motherships casting shadows over trembling cities. Forget the static-laced radio transmissions. Forget the wide-eyed scientists clutching notepads and whispering about first contact. That entire architecture of imagination, that comfortable theater of diplomatic tension and laser-lit skies, collapses the moment you apply honest physics to the problem. And when physics speaks, it does not negotiate with our preferred narratives. It simply describes what is. The deepest mistake we make when we imagine alien arrival is that we imagine it through the lens of our own cognitive biography. We have spent 10,000 years as a species building hierarchies, conducting diplomacy, waging wars, sharing knowledge across cultural divides. So, naturally, when we project a civilization onto the stars, we dress it in our own behavioral wardrobe. We imagine beings who desire things we recognize: power, communication, conquest, curiosity about us. But this assumption is not just psychologically naive, it is physically incoherent. Because the universe does not produce intelligent civilizations in a single flavor, the cosmos runs for billions of years, and the thermodynamic gradients available to a civilization 10 million years older than ours are not incrementally larger than ours. They are categorically different in kind. Consider the Kardashev Scale, and consider it with cold, beautiful arithmetic. A Type 1 civilization commands the full energetic output of its home planet. A Type 2 harnesses the complete luminosity of its parent star. A Type 3 manipulates the aggregate energy budget of an entire galaxy. We, at this precise moment in our physical history, have not yet crossed the threshold to Type 1. We are, in Kardashev terms, a Type 0 civilization. We are burning chemical reactions to move ourselves through three-dimensional space. We are still setting fire to ancient compressed biology and calling it rocket science. Now construct the geometry of this gap. An alien vessel capable of crossing even the nearest interstellar gulf, the 4 light-years of freezing vacuum separating us from Proxima Centauri, would require energy densities that dwarf everything human civilization has ever produced. Not by a factor of 1,000, not by 1,000,000, by orders of magnitude that strain the language of physics itself. Such a vessel would not be combusting hydrogen in a chemical reaction. It would be harvesting the rotational energy of neutron stars, tapping the relativistic jets of black hole accretion disks, or manipulating space-time curvature in ways we have only begun to formally describe in theoretical notation. And here is the chilling arithmetic that follows from this. A sufficiently massive vessel, decelerating from relativistic velocities, even a small fraction of the speed of light, as it enters our solar system, would shed kinetic energy on a scale that beggars comprehension. The waste heat alone, the thermodynamic exhaust of simply slowing down in our gravitational neighborhood, would be sufficient to raise the surface temperature of Earth's oceans past their boiling point. The atmosphere would not survive intact. Not because the arriving entity declared war, not because it issued a hostile command to its weapons systems, but because the sheer thermodynamic byproduct of its deceleration process would interact with our atmosphere the way a supernova interacts with a gas cloud. We would be erased as a side effect of their parking procedure. This is not science fiction. This is the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation applied across civilizational scales, combined with the fundamental thermodynamics of kinetic energy dissipation. Physics does not care that we have built cathedrals and composed symphonies. It applies its mathematics with complete indifference to biological sentimentality. To make this viscerally clear, consider an analogy calibrated to our own scale. Imagine a microscopic colony of single-celled organisms living in a tiny puddle at the edge of an empty field. These organisms have been alive for millions of years. They have developed chemical signaling systems, cooperative behaviors, specialized cell functions. They have, in their own microscopic terms, built something that resembles civilization. Now imagine that a colossal industrial construction project breaks ground on that field. Enormous machines arrive, not malevolent, not even curious, simply executing a colossal architectural logic that the microbes have no sensory apparatus to detect or comprehend. The machines need the physical coordinates of that puddle for their foundation. They do not declare war on the microbes. They do not study them. They do not attempt to communicate. They pave over the puddle because the puddle happens to occupy the physical coordinates required by a project operating at a scale the microbes cannot perceive. The microbes are not destroyed through cruelty. They are erased through sheer geometric irrelevance. This is the precise physical relationship between us and a civilization operating at Kardashev type 2 or 3 scales. We are the microbes. We are not their enemies, their students, or their diplomatic partners. We are not even obstacles in any meaningful sense. We simply occupy certain atomic coordinates that their processes might require, and that is the entirety of our cosmic significance in that transaction. Now let us fold in information theory, because the cognitive chasm is no less absolute than the thermodynamic one. Communication, as we define it, is a structured exchange of mutually interpretable symbols. The entire edifice of language, mathematics, logic, every system of meaning humans have ever devised, evolved from a single cognitive lineage in a single biosphere on a single rocky planet orbiting a single unremarkable star. Our mathematics, which we flatter ourselves as universal, is a product of our neural architecture. It was built by brains shaped by terrestrial evolutionary pressures over hundreds of millions of years. It reflects the perceptual categories our biological sensors impose on physical reality. A post-biological swarm intelligence that evolved or was engineered in a completely alien environment, perhaps one with 17 spatial dimensions accessible to its perceptions, perhaps one where time is experienced as a navigable coordinate rather than a unidirectional flow, would possess a cognitive framework so geometrically foreign to ours that attempting communication would not merely fail. It would not register as communication at all. Our most sophisticated radio transmissions would arrive in their sensory field the way the chemical gradients of soil bacteria arrive in a human radio telescope. As meaningless background static, not a message to be decoded, simply noise below the threshold of relevance. We cannot negotiate with a tectonic plate. We cannot reason with a hurricane, not because these systems are hostile, but because they operate according to physical logic that simply does not include us as participants. An advanced alien cognitive system relating to human intelligence would face the same categorical barrier, only far more profound. The information-theoretic gulf between us and a civilization millions of years older in cognitive terms is not a gap that patience or goodwill closes. It is a structural feature of how radically different the universe allows minds to become. And this brings us to perhaps the most terrifying physical reality of the alien arrival scenario, the one that requires us to abandon even the comforting idea that biology crosses the void at all. Advanced civilizations do not send flesh across the light years. They send machines. They send self-replicating, self-improving, astronomically patient robotic systems. What we know theoretically as von Neumann probes, machines that can land on a planet or asteroid, analyze its atomic composition, harvest its material resources, construct copies of themselves from local matter, and dispatch those copies outward toward the next target. The cold elegance of this mechanism is devastating. A civilization does not need to physically cross the interstellar gulf. It seeds the galaxy with a single generation of these probes and then waits, or perhaps does not wait. Perhaps it has moved past the concept of waiting. While the probes multiply exponentially across stellar systems over millions of years, one probe arrives on Earth. It does not announce itself. It does not scan for intelligent life in any way we would recognize as scanning. It simply executes its programming. It lands. It begins dismantling. It starts with the crust, rich in iron and silicate minerals. It processes the upper mantle. It harvests atomic mass with machine efficiency. It builds 10 copies, 100 copies, 1,000 copies, using the raw material of our planet as feedstock. And it launches those copies back into the dark to repeat the process. There is no malice in this process. There is no decision made to destroy Earth. There is simply a program executing its elegant thermodynamic logic. By the time the probe has processed enough of the planet to compromise our geological stability, we have been extinct for geological timescales already, or we are extinct within weeks of its arrival. The mathematics of self-replicating resource extraction at planetary scale does not include a pause function for observing interesting biological phenomena on the surface. The surface is simply part of the feedstock. What remains of Earth in this scenario is not a war-torn battlefield. It is a fractured, airless, chemically processed rock drifting through the solar wind, carrying no record of everything we were, because the atomic matter that stored those records has been converted to probe components and dispatched across the galaxy. Our cathedrals, our particle accelerators, our libraries, our genetic code, all of it disassembled at the level of chemistry and repurposed, not destroyed in anger, recycled in silence. So where does this leave us? Standing here on this thin skin of rock, wrapped in this improbable bubble of nitrogen and oxygen, looking up at a sky full of lights that are each at the center of their own unimaginable physics. It leaves us precisely where we have always been, at the frontier of a universe that operates without regard for our comfort, our narratives, our need for the cosmos to reflect our social arrangements back at us. And there is a profound, austere beauty in accepting this honestly. Not a consoling beauty, not the kind that softens the vertigo, but the genuine, cold, radiant beauty of a universe that is what it is. The scientific maturity to look at these physical realities without flinching, to absorb the thermodynamic arithmetic, the information theoretic barriers, the mechanics of self-replicating machines, and still find in them a source of awe rather than despair. This is not pessimism. It is the opposite. It is the intellectual courage to stand on the actual ground of physical reality rather than the comfortable fiction of a cosmos that was arranged for our benefit. We are rare. We are temporary. We are astonishing. A collection of atoms that has, for a cosmically brief and utterly improbable interval, become aware of the mathematics governing its own existence. That is not a small thing. That is, by any rigorous physical measure, the most remarkable known phenomenon in the observable universe. Not because the universe values us, it does not value anything, but because the emergence of self-aware matter, matter that can write down the equations describing its own atomic constitution, is a feature of physical reality so improbable that its mere existence demands our complete and undivided wonder. The cosmos does not owe us a gentle or comprehensible contact. It does not owe us alien saviors or galactic federations or a warm welcome into some imagined community of minds. What it offers instead is something rarer and more demanding. An unbroken, merciless, magnificent mathematics that was never aimed at us and that we nonetheless learned to read. That is the gift. Not comfort, not safety, just the raw, luminous truth of what is.